Good afternoon, everybody. I was looking at some of the participants who are here. I see a lot of former students, and I'm sitting over in a classroom in New Hall to do this presentation, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it. I'm going to talk first about some of the legal side of the CSI Effect, and then my colleague Mindy will have more of the scientific side, and then we'll take questions. The term CSI Effect came from the long-running show CSI, which ran for about 16 years on CBS and was a very popular show. And in addition to the CSI franchise, this was also a time when Law and Order was running on NBC. That was a long-running series. And then on another network, they had a series called Bones. And so CSI was not the only show that depicted forensic science and the law, but it was one of the main ones. And so this term has originated soon after the CSI show became popular, called the CSI Effect. I first heard this term in about 2004 when I was talking to one of the local prosecutors about a case that they were getting ready to try where they didn't have any scientific evidence, and they were a little worried about being able to get a conviction even though they thought they had a solid case. And this prosecutor used that term. It's the CSI Effect. We're worried about it. The CSI Effect is the belief that some of these television crime shows affect trial verdict decisions made by jurors. Now, how does it affect it? It's a theory, okay? But it's said to affect verdicts in two ways. And sometimes it might benefit the state, and sometimes it might benefit the defense. One way that it might affect a verdict is that jurors have a higher level of confidence in forensic evidence that is presented than they should, which might result in a higher conviction rate. If there is scientific evidence present, then that might lead to a conviction, even though there might, by other ways, be reasonable doubt. On the other hand, you can have a case like I described a little bit ago with the prosecutor back in 2004, where jurors expect there to be scientific evidence, and they expect more forensic evidence than available, which might result in a higher acquittal rate, even though the prosecutor may have proven his case beyond a reasonable doubt by other means. So depending on the circumstances, either the state or the prosecution or the defense can benefit. I'm going to mention just a few different scenarios to see how the theory might apply, and then we're going to talk about a study that a Michigan trial judge did on the validity of the CSI Effect. So this first example here, there's an actor, Robert Blake, and he was charged with the homicide of his late wife. The incident occurred in April of 2002. Circumstances were he and his wife had dinner in a restaurant, and then they went out and got in their car to leave, and Blake said that he had forgotten and left something inside of the restaurant. So he went back inside, left his wife sitting in the car with the windows down, and then his wife was shot when he supposedly was inside of the restaurant retrieving whatever it was that he left behind. The gun that was used to shoot his ex-wife was found in a trash can pretty close to where the car was parked. They had a case of motive against Blake. He had also talked to other people about having his wife killed. But they didn't have a lot of solid scientific evidence to link him to the crime. They didn't have any blood on his clothing. They were not able to connect him to the firearm that was used. They did tests for gunshot residue, but there was such a minuscule amount that there was no way they could prove that it was there as a result of a recent firing, as opposed to just going to the shooting range, which he apparently did on a pretty regular basis. So he was found not guilty. Now, later on, there was a civil suit filed, and he was found liable. It was kind of like the first O.J. Simpson case, where you had an acquittal in the criminal case, but a finding of liability in a civil case. Now, another scenario is that can benefit the state is that if there is some scientific evidence, the state can benefit regardless of how solid the scientific evidence is. The CSI Effect theory is that juries expect scientific evidence, and if the scientific evidence is there, they seem to trust it without a lot of hesitation sometimes, particularly if there's not a strong effort by the defense to be able to challenge it. But not all forensic evidence is considered to be extremely reliable in the scientific community. Not all of it should be trusted without hesitation. There's an organization known as the Innocence Project, and then there's a National Registry of Exonerations. The Innocence Project is a national organization that helps people who believe they've been wrongfully convicted. If they can produce, if there's DNA evidence for testing, they can try to undo the conviction. And so they've studied the reasons why people have been convicted, even though they were factually innocent of their crimes. And one of the reasons that is commonly suggested is that there's some scientific evidence that's been inappropriately applied. And that's not the only reason. Some of the cases of wrongful conviction involve multiple factors. You know, for example, there might be a flawed eyewitness ID. There might be flawed scientific evidence. There might be ineffective counsel. But anyway, misapplied forensic science is still a reason that contributed to 52% of the wrongful convictions. And then the National Registry of Exonerations is just a data point that registers people who've been exonerated, regardless of the reasons. And they've got over 1,000 names on that registry now. And false or misleading forensic evidence is a contributing factor in about 25% of those cases. And also, in some cases, there's scientific evidence that was trusted at the time it was offered, but since that time, there's new theory that comes about that indicates that the former science was not as trustworthy as it was first thought. And this is just one example here. There's a woman named Christine Bunch, which is an Indiana case, and she was convicted of a homicide arising out of an alleged arson. And one of the areas that's been suggested of misapplied forensic evidence has been in arson cases, the expert testimony on the cause and origin of a fire. In order to prove arson, you have to prove an intentionally set fire. And previously, it had been pretty regular to have experts for the government come in and say that they saw pour patterns and accelerants poured, and express a theory that a fire was intentionally set because of these patterns that had been observed. But a lot of those theories have now been debunked in subsequent years. And this is one of the cases that has been overturned. Christine Bunch's conviction was reversed because of erroneous admission of expert testimony dealing with the point of origin of the fire. Some other areas are bite mark evidence, okay, it's being a problem. Microscopic hair comparison evidence is a problem. Comparative bullet lead analysis is a problem, just to share a few examples other than arson. So there are some people who've been shown to have been wrongfully convicted because they had scientific evidence for the government, but it just turned out that the scientific evidence was unreliable. This last specific example is a case that I'm sure everybody remembers, which is the Casey Anthony case. It's about 10 years old now, but I think most people probably remember it. She was charged with killing her daughter. And the thing about this case is that there was a circumstantial case against her. They had evidence of motive, but there was a lot of experts that testified in that trial. There was 37 experts testified in that trial, 23 for the government and 14 for the defense. And they had some testimony about, there was one area of the smell of death in whether the trunk of the car where Casey Anthony's car had the smell of death in it and had a body been stored there for a period of time. But they didn't really have any solid DNA evidence that were able to link up the case. And additionally, this was a case where the defense put up a strong challenge to the expert testimony that was used by the state. And so if you've got a case where there's some science, but the defense puts on a strong effort to challenge it with a lot of their own experts, sometimes that discounts the CSI effect a little bit, and the defense can get an acquittal. The problem is that in a lot of cases, the defense doesn't have the resources to be able to put on an effective challenge. For example, if they're represented by the public defender's office, they have limited funding for expert witnesses in many cases. So, but this case, the Anthony case, was not a public defender case. There was a budget to be able to hire a lot of expert witnesses. And so it turned out that Casey Anthony was acquitted of the homicide charge. She was found guilty of lying to the police officers during the course of their investigation, but I believe those were all misdemeanor convictions, and I think she was credited for time served, and she's moved on. So those are three examples of how the CSI effect can play out in practice. Now, one of the last things I'm going to mention is there was one study done on the CSI effect. There's been more than that, but one of the ones that's gotten a lot of discussion is this study that's done by a couple of criminology professors at Eastern Michigan, and also a Michigan judge named Donald Shelton. And this was done about 12 years ago. They surveyed 1,000 Michigan jurors prior to their participation in the trials. And so they just asked them a series of questions about their expectations and demands for scientific evidence and whether they'd watch CSI and some other similar programs. And so here are the types of cases that they were asking about. Every criminal case, murder, attempted murder, physical assault, rape or criminal sexual conduct, breaking and entering, theft, and any crime involving a gun. And so they went down in the series of questions they asked. They would ask them whether they expected to see scientific evidence, what type of scientific evidence did you expect to see, and so on. And so, as you see there, they ask them the types of evidence that they expected to see with a breakdown on the type of case. So, do you expect eyewitness? Do you expect eyewitness from other people besides the victim? What about scientific evidence? What about DNA and fingerprint? What about ballistics? So here's the findings on some of their questions here. So 46% expected to see scientific evidence in every criminal case. That's really not realistic for a lot of different reasons, okay? 22% expected to see DNA evidence in every criminal case. Once again, not realistic. 36% expected to see fingerprint evidence in every criminal case. Again, not realistic. And then ballistic or firearms evidence in every criminal case, 32%. So these findings illustrate that potentially, at least, a lot of those jurors had very high expectations and perhaps some unrealistic expectations about forensic evidence. But they also asked some other questions. And one of the ultimate questions that they asked was whether or not their expectations of seeing scientific evidence would prevent them from rendering a guilty verdict if they saw other evidence to establish guilt. In other words, if they were serving as a juror on a criminal case and they expected science and didn't see any, but the prosecution offered enough proof through other means to perhaps prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, would they still be willing and able to convict? And most of those respondents answered, a really strong majority of them answered, yes, they would be able and willing to convict if they saw enough other evidence. So, so what conclusions do you draw from that? One of the conclusions you can draw is that jurors do expect seemingly to see scientific evidence more often than they should. On the other hand, though, if they don't see the scientific evidence, then they are still willing to convict, at least a strong majority would be, if they saw other evidence to establish guilt. All right, now, I think this is one of my last slides here. How does the CSI effect impact practice? The Shelton study seemed to draw some mixed conclusions on whether the CSI even exists at all. It definitely showed that it impacted jurors' expectations, but it didn't necessarily show that it impacted the results that juries reached, okay? But regardless of whether it exists in that context, there's a heck of a lot of people that think that it exists, and those people are prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges. And so this theory of the CSI effect definitely has impacted how things are done now. For example, it can potentially impact jury selection, okay? So in selecting a jury, you have two types of jury challenges to jurors. The whole jury selection process is called voir dire. And so after voir dire is over with, after the attorneys and the judge have questioned the jury members, you have the opportunity to make challenges. And so a for cause challenge is where you say, well, for a specific reason or comment this juror made, we ask that they be removed from eligibility, and a judge has to sign off on that. Then there's a second type of challenge called a peremptory challenge, where you just make it based on gut feeling or hunch or what a jury consultant has told you. But there's a lot of discussion in voir dire now about CSI effect. There are jurors that are being asked about what shows they watch and what kind of expectations they have. And there's been some instances where if a juror makes a certain comment during voir dire, it's enough to get him removed from jury for cause. So it's definitely impacted jury selection. Additionally, there are some jurisdictions that give jury instructions in some cases. I know that the state of Maryland has an instruction that they use, and basically in certain types of cases, they'll give it. And the instruction basically says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there is not one generally required way to investigate and process crimes or crime scenes. And then the jury is basically told that the prosecution is not required to produce scientific evidence in every case, and there should be no inference taken by their failure to do so. So a lot of states are giving instructions if asked, if you have a case where there's no scientific evidence, if the prosecution wants one of those instructions. Also, there's potentially more tests are done now just to deal with questions that might arise at trial dealing with the CSI effect. So for example, a defense attorney might have a cross-examination strategy to want to cross-examine an expert saying, well, did you do this test and this test and this test and this test, trying to point out that maybe the investigation was not as thorough as it should have been. So there's a lot of situations now where there are just a lot more tests done than there used to be, just to try to forestall these type of challenges that arise when witnesses are cross-examined. Also, there's in some types of cases now, prosecutors in particularly are calling a type of witness that is sometimes called a negative evidence witness. A negative evidence witness is an expert, but this expert is called, and basically what this expert does is he or she explains why there is no scientific evidence available, okay? You know, in other words, the prosecution's just acknowledging, look, we don't have any scientific evidence, here's why. And here's a witness who is qualified to explain to you why there is not scientific evidence available to us. So some prosecutors are calling those witnesses now. There's a whole body of expert testimony out there that deals with this area. And finally, there's just, I think Mindy will confirm this, probably this whole CSI Effect thing has resulted in more interest in science and in forensic science. And that's another thing that Judge Shelton said, that studied the CSI Effect, is he said, one of his observations is that this whole phenomenon of the CSI Effect has potentially made jurors a little bit smarter. They ask more questions. There's not necessarily anything wrong with jurors having high expectations in criminal cases, and if they're still willing to convict, if the prosecution puts on enough proof, then what's the harm of having a CSI Effect, basically? So anyway, I think that's a good segue into Mindy's time, and then I'll be hanging around to take questions if there are any.
Yes, you will, Barry, and thank you very much. One question I would have is, as a teacher, instructor, perhaps teaching Criminal Justice 101, do students come to you with the CSI Effect? But we'll answer that in a little while.
Yeah.
So, Dr. McPherson, I want you to continue on, if you will. I see your presentation is coming up. Just unmute yourself. There you are. Thank you.
Super. So I thought what I would do for my portion of our time here this afternoon is to really take some time and consider the realities of forensic science and crime scene investigation. As Barry kind of alluded to, maybe it's not such a bad thing if there is a CSI effect. I know routinely we'll have conversations in my courses about all of the shows, and there are so many shows now, and we get excited about them, and they're interesting, and on some level I think we all can appreciate there's a little bit of glamour sprinkled in there. Sometimes I feel like the forensic science aspect of the TV shows is cut down to maybe like 10 seconds. But I thought I would share some of my experiences here at Columbia College from my lens, having worked in forensic science laboratories before coming to academia. And so as Keith shared in his kind introduction, before I came to Columbia College, I worked as an explosives chemist for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, as well as the Department of the Navy. And so I have experience working forensic cases, both in pre-blast and post-blast explosives. And so my students and some of the alums I see on the attendee list will confirm I'm always happy to talk about explosives. And I encourage those of you who might be interested in either chatting about explosives or just forensic science in general beyond the time that we have together here today. I'm happy to always connect with alums and prospective students, and my email is here for you. So please reach out, certainly. So in talking about the CSI effect and forensic science, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the realities of this world. And so my students and my alums will confirm that the one sort of primary question we answer over and over and over is, what is the job of a forensic scientist? And we'll commit to memory that our work is to analyze physical evidence and share our findings and opinions in a legal setting of some sort. And this certainly applies for crime scene investigators as well. So though it's exciting to think about the shows and think about the glitz and the glam and the fancy shoes and whatnot with the programs, that's certainly not reality. And so what I'd like to do here this afternoon is to chat through some specifics with regard to the actual reality of crime scene investigation and forensic science. And so we'll hold up some examples of what is real and what is faux, the faux forensic side of things. And in doing that, I'd like to walk you through what I consider to be three of our most valuable assets here at the college that really turn out to be three of the most valuable assets of forensic science laboratories, crime scene investigation units, and related professionals in general. And that's to take a look at the people and the place or the facilities and the things that we do. And so I'm going to very quickly rapid fire here. What is forensic science? And we use forensic science as a very broad term, but it encompasses a lot of different disciplines. We certainly don't have near enough time to talk about all of these this afternoon, but to give you a frame of mind for what typically constitutes forensic science, or what disciplines are typically housed in a full service forensic science laboratory. I'm gonna rapid fire some pictures here. And so certainly serology and forensic biology that we see here. We may have connections to forensic pathologists and forensic anthropologists, but typically these professionals work outside of a forensic lab. So if any of you are fans of Bones and Abby, I think I've never watched it, but heard enough from my students. It seems that there are some professionals who sort of cross over between maybe a traditional lab and maybe focusing more on something like anthropology. Certainly it's a valuable asset to the investigative process, but not typically housed in a forensic science laboratory. One of the main driving units within a forensic lab would be the illicit drug unit, so identification of drugs, coupled with toxicology, so examining biological fluids for evidence of consumption of various intoxicants or poisons. Trace evidence is certainly the unit within a forensic science laboratory that's near and dear to my heart. So some of the images that you're looking at here include fiber, paint, hair evidence is Barry alluded to, considering hair comparison using a microscope has certainly come under some scrutiny, but we'll make the case for coupling that work with mitochondrial DNA work or nuclear DNA work to bring value to cases. And then of course, we also have images here of soil and glass. And it doesn't stop there, right? It just keeps going. Images that we see on this slide relate to pattern comparison sorts of evidence. So firearms examination, fingerprint work, question documents, impression evidence from footwear and tire impressions. And of course, computer evidence is such a booming area within forensic science for investigation purposes, but also utilization of computer technologies to help us evaluate evidence. And so when we think about the CSI effect and we think about, okay, what actually is forensic science, you know, there's a grain of truth in those shows. You've seen lots of these disciplines pop up on various episodes of your favorite program. And so there's some truth, right? It lies somewhere in the middle of the glamorized Hollywood version and what plays out in a forensic science laboratory. And so to highlight some of those important aspects that I mentioned earlier, I want us to start off by considering the people. Many of you who are joining us today are valued alums of our program and are certainly contributing to various agencies across our country. Often when we watch the shows, the CSI and other related programs, you are portrayed as this kind of amazing superhero who can do it all. And I know that many of you can do a lot of things, having had you in class before or worked with you in a professional capacity. But the reality is that we're not processing crime scenes and interviewing suspects and analyzing evidence in the laboratory. We don't actually do it all. And so Detective Scooter Cougar here says, these folks aren't equal. We have amazing forensic professionals. Pictured here some of our alums who are working in DNA evidence, in crime scene investigation, in medical legal death investigation, and certainly beyond these four amazing individuals, we have folks doing all sorts of forensic work surrounding the country. And in practice, what this looks like is that each of these individuals is typically tested to competency to evaluate and analyze one type of evidence. It may be a couple of different related forms of evidence, but these individuals and individuals that are working in a forensic capacity generally will have a focus. So my focus area was explosives. Ashley, who you see here on the bottom, her focus is forensic biology. We may have occasion as laboratory analysts to go out to a crime scene, just depending upon how agencies are structured. There may be special task force response teams, or there may be some individuals who are tasked with doing multiple job functions. But typically these are different people. Typically it's a separate unit who is investigating the crime scene and collecting the evidence, and it's separate individuals who are working in the laboratory to process that evidence. So that brings me to the second point to highlight. Beyond the people, let's talk about the place. And the place in my mind is the forensic lab, or in this case, the forensic lab. And so if you've watched the shows, right, you see all sorts of interesting things actually transpire in these really kind of space age looking buildings. They're always in the dark, which is troubling to me, with interesting lighting and materials, equipment that sometimes doesn't really make any sense at all. Beakers full of who knows what. And so, TV glamorizes this environment and spices it up a bit. The reality is maybe a little more stark than what we see portrayed in the TV shows. And to give you a glimpse into what an average laboratory would look like, I'm going to share with you just a short video, actually, of our facilities here at Columbia College. And so for those of you who may not be local to Missouri, maybe you're from CCG, or just simply haven't had the opportunity to come to campus in a few years, back in 2013, we opened the Brooder Science Center. And the Brooder Science Center houses the crime simulation laboratory that you're seeing here. It contains various instrumentation, including high-end microscopes. This is one of our advanced biology laboratories. And you may think, well, gosh, why are you showing a video of Columbia College? Well, the reality is our laboratories look pretty darn similar to what a practicing forensic science laboratory would look like. We rely on the foundational principles of chemistry and biology. We use the very same instrumentation that practicing forensic scientists do. So in our instrumental laboratory, we have, here we go, specialized instrumentation in the form of infrared spectrometers, a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, very specialized instrumentation that allows our students to have the opportunity to analyze evidence just exactly in the same way that practicing forensic scientists would. The microscope that you just saw a minute ago was made possible through generous donations to our program. And so we're certainly most thankful for any support along those lines that we can receive and make these opportunities and equipment available to our current students. So beyond then the people, the real life superheroes and the place that maybe has, you know, fluorescent lighting and kind of a stark appearance, I want to spend just a bit of time talking about the things. And the things in my mind equate to the work that's done by the amazing forensic professionals in our community. So we can start by considering the crime scene investigation team. Much of this work is glamorized and maybe condensed a great deal when we see it play out on television. A few pictures can be taken. Certainly they always know exactly where to look for that one key piece of evidence, and they may just grab it and look at it. Well, number one, we ensure in reality that we are very thorough, that we're safe, right? That we're wearing appropriate PPE, gloves and masks and things like that, and are really working to take our time to fully document the scene through sketching, through pictures, through scanning tools available in some cases now. After we've documented a scene, we're certainly interested in collecting evidence, and where once upon a time we might joke about an investigator sticking a pencil down the barrel of a firearm to collect it, you'll see crazy things like this happen on the television shows, right? So we don't pick up firearms evidence. We don't stick pencils in it or anything crazy like that. We want to make sure that we're maintaining the integrity of the evidence. That includes handling it very carefully when we're collecting it and packaging it appropriately. So when it makes its way to the laboratory, the scientists who will analyze that evidence really have the best shot to get them the highest quality information from that evidence that technology permits. And so that brings me to the point of considering these various forms of analysis. One of the most exciting and speediest portions of the CSI type crime shows is the analysis, where the interested examiners get their quizzical look and they approach the computer and they have this flashy screen that spits back results in 2.2 seconds. And what do you know, we have a match for a fingerprint recovered on some evidence. And well, it's somewhat true that we do rely on computers and database searches. The human professional, the expert, plays such an important and significant role in this process, from appropriately collecting the evidence, handling it, possibly using computerized searches, maybe to look for database hits. But it certainly doesn't happen in 2.2 seconds, and it certainly requires an expert's trained eye to then be able to further scrutinize that evidence and make a determination as to whether or not an identification has been made. So the flashy software programs are nice to look at and give us immediate gratification on television, but it's a bit lengthier of a process in real life. Barry mentioned in his chat the concern with regard to some forms of forensic evidence, right? Maybe overstating the strength of evidence, and certainly a concern for ensuring that we're using appropriate methodologies as we do our work. And so that's one thing I wanted to highlight here as well. If any of my alums out there remember from class, I will often show this clip from CSI, this top clip, where they're doing some work called corneal imaging, and they get a reflection of the bad guy in the victim's cornea. And what do you know? They can zoom in some more, and they know exactly who the perpetrator was. You know, when it comes to digital evidence, there's a limit to what you can actually get from that. Zooming in more and more and more doesn't really make things a whole lot better. The bottom image is, again, from CSI, and it's just depicting a sort of experiment that was done on a particular episode to understand what might have happened in a particular case. And while we might do sorts of experiments like this to help us better understand evidence and different phenomena, we certainly can't rely on sort of off-the-cuff methods to apply to evidence from a case. We have to rely on tried and true, scientifically founded methods and instrumentation. And so a bit of a snapshot here of some of the tools used in the forensic lab. I highlighted a microscope for you in the video that certainly, coupled with some of these other very sophisticated pieces of instrumentation, allow us to put robust scientific methods into practice to scrutinize the evidence. And one of the last sort of comments I'd like to make and share with you is one of the exciting tools that we have in our arsenal here at Columbia College. Once again, thanks to the generosity of a donor, we were able to purchase for the crime scene investigation and forensic science programs a portable chemical identification system. And so I'm going to share one more video with you to demonstrate how this particular instrument works and how it really affords our students the hands-on ability to put the science into practice. And so this is where the CSI effect a little bit meets reality, because this is just a pretty darn cool tool to have and play with. And it's actually pretty fast, as you'll see. So I hope you'll enjoy this short clip.
This is our portable Ramen Spectrometer. It's a first offender RMX, and it utilizes Ramen spectroscopy. And through that technology, we can identify specific compounds within samples. So the method relies upon laser light. So the first thing that I'm going to do is turn on our laser. And when that is on and ready to go, I can simply take my sample. The great thing about it is it can analyze through containers like glass. So I align my sample right up with the nose cone of the laser beam. I tell it to scan, and it happens relatively quickly. So right now the laser light is traveling down our probe. It's interacting with the sample. The instrument itself is collecting data, and after it's finished collecting data, it will go through a comparison process where the information that's collected, which it's doing now, is searched against a database contained in the system. And after it performs this search and compares the information we've collected to what's stored, it comes back and it tells us that our sample is actually sugar. And so that green light gives us green bar gives us a positive indication and identification that, in fact, the white powder that we have contained here is sugar.
So that's just a quick little look into one of the tools that we utilize for crime scene investigation, for forensic science, and for the opportunity to give our current students some experience analogous to what they'll face when they are professionals one day. And so with that, I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite pictures of all time. This is a blast of about 20,000 pounds of military C4 taken from about 4 miles away. And so I'll go ahead and stop my presentation, and I think we'll have the opportunity to answer some questions that you might want to share with us in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dr. McPherson. Thank you very much, Barry Langford, on your presentations. Those were very interesting. I, again, want to ask, as I did to Barry, do you have students coming in also with that idea of having watched CSI or some other crime investigation movies, kind of with that idea, yeah, this is probably why they wanted to major in forensics, or this is what they knew about it beforehand, and sort of that both beforehand and after survey.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And, you know, that's actually, when we talk about the CSI effect, we'll focus on that, the educational effect. And certainly it does interest a lot of students in kind of, you know, piques their desire to learn more about the realities of science and forensic science. And so we'll always have interesting discussions about, you know, what brought everyone to study forensic science. What experience do they have? On occasion, we'll make lists of all the programs that everyone enjoys watching. You know, in the earlier years of the shows, I think there maybe wasn't quite as much scrutiny as there is today. But one of the other interesting related effects that sort of globally we can look at is the technology effects, right? Technology is everywhere in our lives. I mean, like you said, hey, Zoom is where it's at. And so I think there is a heightened awareness of technology and capabilities. And so the students coming to us now are aware of those things. They might not know the nuanced ins and outs of theoretical aspects of this and that, but they know enough to ask the questions. And so we definitely have a good foundation to build from and maybe compare and contrast to along the way. Good.
Before I really get into the Q&A part, and I'm going to bring Barry back into this, I definitely want to give hats off to two staff members here, two of my colleagues, two people who work in the alumni office with me. Carolyn Prohl, she's the Associate Director of Advancement Communications, and Kiana Austin, our Administrative Assistant for Alumni Relations here in Advancement, as well as Kevin Fletcher, our Strategic Communication Specialist, for their assistance in helping me pull this event off. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Our vision at the Columbia College Alumni Association is to connect all of our alumni, the Christian College alumni, the Day alumni, nationwide, our online platforms, trying to sort of engage their participation as alumni, keep you connected with bringing you this kind of programming, certainly request your support. I appreciate that Dr. McPherson mentioned that a lot of their technology, a lot of their computers and all that stuff that she sees was from the benefit of a generous donor. And philanthropy doesn't just happen. It's not just organic. You nurture that and cultivate that relationships, and it actually does begin here. So I want to thank you for that. So I want to remind you to go to our website, our alumni merchandise store. We have alumni perks and all that kind of thing. But I definitely wanted to turn over to a few questions that members of our alumni are asking you. And sort of this first one was, what is your take on the TV show called Forensics File?
If it's the one I'm thinking about, and you know, there's so many of those shows now that run on so many different channels, and some of them are live and some of them are syndicated and delayed and so on. But if it's the one I'm thinking about, the Forensic File, it's either a half hour or an hour, and they will take a case and then go backward in time and explain what happened and why and what the result was and so on. And if that's the one that you're thinking about, that's kind of the one I'm thinking about. I think I like that show. And I think it's pretty realistic too. And I will occasionally show excerpts from that in class just to illustrate particular points. So I like that particular show if we're thinking about the same one there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I've had former colleagues who have presented their cases on that show. So that's definitely not kind of the crime drama that we might think could traditionally lead to something like the CSI Effect, but certainly a show like that might lead a little bit more to like realistic expectations for a jury. The downfall, of course, is that all the shows fit into the nice 30-minute session or 45 minutes or whatever it is, which is certainly not realistic for the amount of time it takes to work a case.
Got you. Dr. McPherson, some person, alum, Vandy asked, how reliable is DNA evidence? I know you talked about technology, and again, thanks to the generous donation of a philanthropist, you got some good technology, but how reliable is DNA evidence?
Sure. DNA evidence is probably the most reliable piece of forensic evidence that we can point to. Going back to 2009, when a very important report was issued from the National Academy of Sciences, kind of checking in on the pulse of forensic science, to another report that came out from the president's scientific advisors under the Obama administration. All those reports point to DNA as being kind of the gold standard, really. Part of the reason for that is that it is born out of genetics laboratories. And so forensic science very much poaches the great technology and science from other disciplines. And certainly that research and the DNA processing methodology is very robust. The statistical information is well researched and well understood. And so if we had to hold up anything as kind of the best, and we do often consider DNA to be the gold standard.
Got you. I think this next one is for Barry. As forensic information is used to convict, is forensic information used to convict as well as to acquit? Are there limitations on justice based on budgets?
Yes, unfortunately, in several ways. Indigents in the United States are entitled to a defense. That means that they get an attorney if they are indigent, paid for at government expense. But unless the case is an insanity defense, indigents are not yet, anyway, constitutionally entitled to the assistance of an expert witness. And so what you have in many cases is, the government's expert is free of charge to them. They typically come across the evidence as a result of their job. They're brought samples and they test and then they testify. If the defendant wants to hire somebody to contest that, they're going to have to find the funding. And if they're an indigent, they're probably not going to have the funding unless it's a death penalty case. If it's a death penalty case, then they typically don't spare a lot of expense there. But it's pretty rare anymore to even have a death penalty case. So, a lot of cases go forward without the defense having a budget to be able to really hire an expert witness and put up a good challenge. And then additionally, with some of these groups like, Innocence Project and so forth, they're nonprofits typically, and they help people who have been wrongfully convicted. But occasionally they have budgets, and I think that they would like to take in more cases than they do, but they've got criteria where they have to draw lines. And there are a lot of cases where people need help and there's not money to help them, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. Speaking of technology, I know Dr. McPherson has mentioned, how technology has just really helped. Barry, have you seen in the past, few years that technology has helped your profession, your discipline? I know in mock trial and other kinds of things that you do here on the student level, what has technology done to help or quicken the pace of all, evidence and all, the investigations? Has technology helped in your area?
Yeah, I know that the people that, maybe initially process crime scenes, they carry, I forget the names of some of these devices, but they carry devices that can do quick analysis for drugs, and they can do spot tests for intoxication, and they can do quick tests on substances to know what kind of a substance it is and so forth. There's, all kinds of laser equipped technology that helps in certain areas. So, I guess in terms of the law and the courts, maybe technology is not quite as important there per se, although courts do definitely admit, scientific and technical related evidence. But yeah, police officers definitely, they like gadgets. They like spending money on gadgets and using them. And yeah, that's definitely a part of it.
Gotcha.
Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Dr. McPherson, we have one, actually it's a particular one. I have several students and several conversations with nurses interested in more forensic nursing roles. Is there an interest or a way for nursing students to cross over training?
Certainly. So as part of our forensic science curriculum here at Columbia College, we do offer a minor in forensic science, which we have had, I can think of at least one nursing student come through as of late. The nursing curriculum is very full, so it's tricky to kind of tack in additional courses simultaneously, but pursuing a minor would be certainly an option, and that gives students a peek into forensic science kind of general issues, evidence collection, testimonial concerns, which are kind of the primary things for forensic nurses to consider in terms very often of being required to collect evidence related to sexual assault kits and that sort of work. I have heard, though I don't know how far this has gone, some rumblings that we might even be exploring some more intentional partnerships between forensic science and nursing at Columbia College. So I'm going to say, stay tuned and let's make it happen, because certainly there's a need for that.
Are you making an announcement here, Dr. McPherson? No one else
no.
knows?
The dean was on this call. I am making no such announcement, but it's always exciting to think about new possibilities. And we have such a robust nursing program. And I like to think such a great forensic science program. What a great partnership that would be.
Got you. I do want to respect our time. We allotted to 5:30 for this presentation. I'd certainly, if you, Mindy and Barry, want to hang on, we can do a few more questions, but I do want to officially adjourn the presentation. I do want to do one quick screen share with you. There we are. All right. We have a few more events with the Columbia College Alumni Association. I do want to point out that next week, March 23rd, that's on a Tuesday, we have our third annual Giving Day. I really encourage all of our alumni to make a gift. Any gift is fine on this day. It certainly reflects your interest in what we're doing at Columbia College. As Mindy and Barry have said, we do rely on the generosity of philanthropy. The Mock Trial Association is also has philanthropic intentions to everyone, as well as the work that Dr. McPherson does. So please, March 23rd is third annual Giving Day. We have two other career services events coming up on April 14th and May 26th. Those are focusing on job searching and interviewing, but they are also co-hosted by the Alumni Association. And right in the middle of that is on May 1st, we're having a face-to-face commencement exercise. We were offered the space at Mizzou Arena for here at main campus to conduct commencement. So we're very, very, very excited about that one. And of course, looking to the fall, October 16th, we have homecoming. So I wanted to share that all with you as far as upcoming dates. These will be posted in the future for you. For those of you who are still on, we certainly could entertain additional questions. I see them popping in and populating. And so if you don't mind, Dr. McPherson and Barry, I'll continue on with a few other questions for you.
Sure.
One of them asks, most of the crime shows portray the importance of fingerprints being reliable evidence. Can fingerprints be interpreted in different ways? And if so, that happens, what's the significance meaning in the investigation? Fingerprints.
So I'm not 100% positive what you mean by interpreted in different ways, but I can tell you that fingerprint evidence is one of those forensic comparative disciplines that has been scrutinized and has had a wealth of research looking at not only methodologies, but recovery and processing techniques as well. And so there are definitely standards with regard to fingerprint evidence in terms of characterizing the prints. There are set methodologies with regard to the analysis, comparison, evaluation, and verification processes. There's some more interesting research being done now to really understand very clearly the process that's taking place in the examiner's mind as they're looking at evidence. And so generally we don't want to have forensic evidence be scrutinized or interpreted in different ways. So we will rely on standard operating procedures and methods to try to keep those analyses uniform. If there are different ways for interpreting that evidence, you've asked what's the significance mean in an investigation. It could have lots of interesting effects, you might say, with regard to different investigations. And Barry can probably speak a bit more to the Brandon Mayfield case where there was some erroneous identification of fingerprint evidence. And that gets into a broader discussion about bias and things like that. But certainly there are safeguards in place to help prevent situations like that from happening.
Thank you. Do you think that judges can fall victim to the CSI effect, just like jurors do? This is one of our recent graduates, Barry, and make the mistake when admitting or not admitting evidence or testimony because they do not necessarily understand the science behind it.
Judges, so to be a judge, you first have to go to law school and be an attorney. And probably most people in law school did not major in science or math and took as little science and math as their bachelor's degree would allow them to take. They are not normally interested in science and math. Otherwise, they probably would have had their career take them in a different direction. So lawyers are not normally strong on science. You start from that starting point. But judges have to make some decisions on whether to admit scientific evidence or not. There's a new standard that came about 25 years ago called the Daubert Standard. And that put more power really with judges to determine whether expert testimony would be admitted or not. So judges were given this new mission, these new powers, but yet they don't come at scientific evidence from a really strong background. Do they make some mistakes? Yeah, I think they probably do. But they've tried to do some studies on the differences between the Fry standard that used to be the dominant standard and the Daubert standard. And by and large, I think the practices of judges under Fry in admitting evidence are mostly the same as the practices under Daubert. In other words, the fact that we've got a new standard hasn't resulted in a lot of evidence being excluded or kept out in a lot of cases. I think that one of the ideas behind the Daubert standard is that if you've got a new scientific technique, if there's some valid scientific theory behind it, it should come into evidence. Whereas the Fry standard was a general acceptance standard in it. So sometimes new science doesn't have broad general acceptance, but it might be completely reliable, and so that was the theory behind Daubert is let's give judges another way to get more scientific evidence in. I think that in a lot of cases, judges end up just admitting the evidence. Do they understand why they've made particular decisions? Probably not. I know that in the federal courts, they've done a pretty good job of trying to promote training for lawyers and judges in scientific theory because they recognize the weakness of lawyers in this area. But yeah, I think judges probably make some mistakes, but I think they try to compensate for that by just letting stuff in. In other words, if it's a close case, they're going to let it in and let the jury basically evaluate it, let the attorneys cross-examine on it, and try to sift it out that way.
Again, when students come into the program, come to Columbia College and looking at or shopping majors, I know I used to do the shopping of majors. How do you interest them? How do you get them perhaps to become forensics majors or criminal justice majors, criminal justice administration majors? And again, speaking to, I know we have the program and the luxury here on main campus, but if you were to talk to someone at one of our other locations or online, I don't even know if they can major online or get that certificate, but what would you say to them to talk to a student or prospective student?
So I'll jump in, Barry, if that's okay. So the forensic science degree is only offered on the main campus right now. The crime scene investigation certificate is available for students in CCG, with most of those courses being offered in an online capacity. Not all of them, but most of them. And so certainly students on the main campus in Columbia can take those courses and see as well. And so I kind of encourage our students sort of covering the highlights that we talked about today. I love talking about the people here. Beyond talking about our alumni, certainly talking about other faculty and instructors and staff and the amazing community that we have here, the way we're supportive and we're accessible, and we can do so many fun things because we are in this great environment. So having those connections, I think, is really important. I like to highlight our facilities here on the main campus, certainly as being advantageous for our forensic science majors, and our curriculum, the curriculum that we have developed both for our NC students as well as our CCG students is very robust. We, I know, have courses that intentionally are designed to prepare students to consider future certification in different disciplines, maybe looking at certifications through the International Association for Identification, for example. And so we've worked very hard, very diligently to prepare this curriculum to set our students up for success. And part of that really, I think, is to maintain these great connections with our alumni and interested members of our community. Every year I have alumni come back and share with my seniors about their experiences and here's what you need to know about getting a job and that sort of thing. And I think it's encouraging our students across all of our venues that they have the opportunity to be in this great criminal justice, forensic science community and network that has been built up over years.
Thank you. Barry, just we are going to wrap up soon because this is such a fascinating conversation, but Barry, to you, there are, and it's a slightly different one, but broadly speaking of criminal justice and issues that are current or old issues that you have faced both as an instructor and as a practicing prosecutor, how do you as an instructor sort of lead us through very difficult, controversial, politically charged issues that you may have, that you may see in your line of work in criminal justice, and methodologically sort of train us to, what's that Columbia College criminal justice method that you would lead us through those difficult conversations that we would have with criminal justice?
I guess just the first thing is to just lay your cards on the table and tell them that they are going to have to deal with a lot of difficult, intense issues. I mean, it's probably something that just comes with the territory. We try to teach them the importance of of experiencing college and getting a college education and developing a diverse perspective. We try to tell them the importance of being good communicators, including being good listeners. And we try to teach them a little bit about how to be a leader and what it means to be a leader and the expectations that are placed on leaders. And then we try to just in as many of our classes as possible, stay really current with what's going on and just talk through things that are occurring in the news, and just trying to share and develop appropriate perspectives on it.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add to that conversation that I think is more prominent in our work now, at least my work, than it once was, and that's an emphasis for our students to consider self-care, right? This is some heavy stuff, the work that we do as forensic professionals. And so I'll point students to resources related to wellness and self-care and management of that aspect of their professional and personal life.
Fantastic. I want to thank you both. I want to thank you, Barry Langford and Dr. Melinda McPherson, for your presentations tonight. We've had a number of touch bases to make sure that this worked out well. I know you both have had to stay on campus a little bit longer just to make sure everything was right. And thank you very much. I'm on campus too. But this was a fantastic presentation. I look forward to other Cougar conversations, sort of to engage and keep our alumni with great programming. So thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
Thank you. And this concludes our evening with on the CSI Effect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well.